By the end of this video, you should be able to identify and describe the major compromises made by the states before ratification of the Constitution. So please open to your notes section. This presentation can get a little complicated, but that's okay. That's why I put it on a video for you. Please feel free to pause at any point or to rewind. And most importantly, if you have a question or you need clarification, pause the video, raise your hand, and I will come over and do my best to clarify. Okay, this is the United States Capitol building. It's located in Washington, D.C., as we all know. But do you know what happens in this building? Can anybody guess? Well, what happens in this building is the United States Congress makes laws. Congress is located in two parts of this building. They're located in this part, that's where they go to work. And they're located in this part, that's where they go to work. And the president also works here. But this is where Congress meets to discuss, debate, and to eventually write laws. That's very important. Congress is where our representatives meet. So, how do people from Maryland have a voice in D.C.? How do people from California have a voice in D.C.? How do people from Hawaii have a voice in D.C.? They send representatives to speak for them. So the people in Hawaii, which is thousands of miles away from Washington, D.C., they elect certain people that go to Washington and tell Congress what the people in Hawaii want. That's what Congress does. And this is where they do it. Now, here's a term you may not have heard of before. What does a legislature do? Well, a legislature is a group of people that meet to write laws. In other words, they legislate. That's what a legislature does. They meet, they discuss what the people from their state wants, and they write laws. Now, there are two types of legislatures. There are legislatures at the state level. We talked about this in one of an earlier videos. And there is a legislature at the national or federal level. Does anybody know where the legislature for Maryland meets? Well, if you said Annapolis, you'd be correct. That's where the Maryland State Legislature meets. And they discuss what kind of laws should be made for just the state of Maryland. Now, in the United States, at the federal level, the legislature is called Congress. They make the laws that apply to all citizens in the United States. And that's very important because Congress represents the people that live in the individual states, and they go to Congress and tell their colleagues what their state wants, and hopefully a law is made. Now, this is going to be a little tricky in the late 1700s when the government in the United States is first being created, because there are some questions as to who should go to Congress. Okay, if you have a smaller state like Maryland and New Jersey, which has a certain population in it, and then you have a larger state like, let's say, Virginia or Pennsylvania, who has a larger population, should they both be able to send an equal amount of representatives? Well, that's a question that they had to worry about back then. So representation in Congress, again, this is very, very important. Obviously, not everybody in the United States can go to Congress. It's not big enough. So we elect representatives. These symbols here represent population in each of the states. So, what do you think? Should a state like Virginia that has a much greater population than, let's say, Georgia, should Virginia be able to send more representatives to Congress than Georgia? Should Massachusetts be able to send more representatives to Congress than Rhode Island? Or should each state get an equal amount of representatives to Congress? Well, that's something that the early founding fathers had to decide. They're going to have to compromise. Also, there are the slaves in the state. The big question here is, should those slaves count as population in the state? Some people would say yes, of course, because they're human beings and they should count as population. But some people would say, well, slaves don't have any rights, so they're not treated like people. Maybe they shouldn't be counted as people. And this also is going to lead to a debate and a compromise. So representation in Congress, how was it decided in the early United States? Well, there were two plans. There was the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. And you're going to want to watch this slide and then pause it and make sure and copy it into your notes. And of course, if you have any questions, please let me know so I can clarify. This is a little bit complicated, but I think you guys can handle it. So big states like Virginia, in other words, states that have a large population, say representation in Congress should be based on the population. That's the Virginia plan. The more people a state has, the more representatives they should be able to send to Congress. But little states say each state should have an equal representation in the government. In other words, states that have a smaller population say that each state should have an equal representation. That was the New Jersey plan. New Jersey is kind of a smaller state with less population. Virginia has a larger population, so they're going to disagree with each other. And what they do is compromise. And what's that compromise? They meet in the middle. And that middle meeting is called the Great Compromise. Ben Franklin contributed to this, and it's really a stroke of genius. What's created in the legislature, or the law-making body, or Congress, is called a bicameral legislature. Can everybody say that? Bicameral legislature. That's what it's called. And what it does is it turns the legislature, or Congress, into two houses. Okay, they're called houses. One is called the Senate, and in the Senate, there will be 2 representatives per state, regardless of how many people live in the state. And the second house in the legislature is called the House of Representatives. And the amount of representatives sent to the House is based on the population of the state. So now in Congress, the legislature, it's now bicameral. 2 houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Please make sure you have this in your notes, and if you're unclear, raise your hand and let me know. So Ben Franklin, who contributed to the Great Compromise, was thinking about the kind of glasses that he wore. Does anybody know what kind of glasses these are called? With a lens here and a lens here. If you said that they're called bifocals, you'd be correct. That's because the top lens let you see far away, and the lower lens let you see close up, bifocal, to focus. And that's the same idea as a bicameral legislature. There's an upper house and a lower house. The Senate is the upper house. And in the Senate, there are 2 representatives from each state, regardless of the state size. And in the lower house, the House of Representatives, representation in Congress is based on state population. And there are 435 representatives in the House of Representatives today. Can you guess how many senators there are in the Senate? 2 per state. That's right, there's 100 senators today. And here we go. This is the Senate. This is the House of Representatives. Together, they make up Congress. Now, we still have this issue of the slaves and how much should they count towards population. And a compromise was also made in this regard. Now, it's a pretty sad compromise, and it could be even a little bit upsetting, but this is what the history says. Slaves counted as population. So what was agreed upon is the 3/5 compromise. And what they did is they counted every 5 slaves, but 5 slaves only counted as 3 people toward the state population. So if we're counting up the state population and we have, say, 500 slaves, they only count as 300 people towards the population. And of course, the state population determines how much representation each state gets in the House of Representatives. It's very, very important. When the Constitution is finally agreed upon or ratified, the Constitution did not resolve the issue of slavery and its further spread. So you can see this is really quite racist. And that's the way that some of the early members of government kind of viewed things. Maybe we can remember that much of the South owned slaves. So 3/5 compromise. Here's a way to think about it. If you have 5 Caucasian people and you count them towards the population, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many people in that state? 5. But if you have 5 slaves in a state, you count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 slaves, but it only counts as 3 towards the state population. Rather complicated, I know. Please raise your hand if you have any questions, and I will clarify. And what you're going to do at this point is a little bit of a reading on the compromises. You're going to use We the People, pages 113 to 121 and 126 to 127. And you're going to use the sheets in the folder located at the station to create graphic representations or pictures. One in each of the boxes. There are 4 boxes on the sheet. And in the first box, you're going to draw a picture representing the New Jersey Compromise. And in the next box, the Virginia Compromise. Then the Great Compromise. And finally, the 3/5 Compromise. You can use up to 8 words of text in each of these boxes, but the rest has to be pictures. You should work together on this as a group, give each other ideas, try to clarify amongst your group if you can. And again, I must stress that some of this is fairly complex, so please do not hesitate to ask me for clarification.